My father disowned me over a secret. 13 years later, he showed up at my door and froze. I never imagined the day would come when the man who gave me life would turn his back on me, leaving a silence so heavy it echoed through every corner of my existence. My name is Daniel, and I'm 32 years old. For as long as I can remember, my relationship with my father has been a delicate dance of shadows and unspoken words, a complicated mix of love, expectation, and something I couldn't quite name but always felt lurking beneath the surface. Growing up, our family was far from perfect. My parents split when I was 10, and from that moment, everything shifted. My mother remarried quickly, and while I tried to adjust, my father's presence became more distant, more rigid. His visits grew rare and strained, marked by an awkwardness I couldn't break through. I always thought we'd find a way back to each other, that time and patience would heal whatever invisible wound had grown between us. But there was a secret, one I kept buried deep, that changed everything. It wasn't just the distance or the divorce. It was something far more personal, something that shattered the fragile trust we had left. I remember the subtle signs that something was wrong. His eyes avoiding mine during family gatherings, the coldness in his voice when he spoke, the way he seemed to weigh every word before saying it. It was as if I was constantly walking on glass, never sure if I'd hear love or judgment next. The silence between us grew thicker, filled with things neither of us dared say aloud. I felt the sting of rejection not just in his absence but in the spaces he left behind, spaces where a father's warmth should have been. And yet, despite the pain and confusion, I held on to a quiet hope that one day he might understand, might forgive, might come back. But as the years passed, that hope dimmed, replaced by a gnawing question. Could a secret be powerful enough to sever a bond as deep as blood? Now, after 13 long years, he's standing at my door, a ghost from a past I thought was buried forever. And the moment he steps inside, everything changes in a way I never could have expected. What happened next is something I'm still trying to make sense of. In the years following my parents' split, the distance between my father and me wasn't just physical. It was a chasm carved out by silence and missed opportunities. I remember countless weekends when I'd wait by the phone, heart pounding with hope that he'd call or knock on the door, but the silence would always answer instead. When he did come around, the visits felt like obligations rather than moments of genuine connection. Our conversations were clipped, guarded, as if we were both afraid that saying too much would shatter the fragile thread holding us together. At family dinners, his eyes would drift past me, never quite meeting mine, as if I were a stranger sitting at the table. I tried to catch his gaze, to find any sign of the father I once knew, but all I found was a cold reserve that left me feeling invisible. There were subtle ways his rejection seeped into everyday life. When I achieved something, good grades, a school play, a small victory, his acknowledgement was a nod or a grunt at best, never the proud smile or warm embrace I craved. I learned to dampen my excitement, to keep my successes small and quiet, so as not to invite that familiar disappointment. I held on to the hope that his silence was just a shield, that beneath it was a man struggling with his own pain, not a father who had given up on me. I told myself that maybe he was protecting me in his own flawed way, that his distance was a form of love I just didn't understand yet. But with every passing year, the weight of that unspoken distance grew heavier. I started to carry an ache that wasn't just about missing a father's love. It was about feeling unworthy of it. The loneliness wasn't just about being alone in a room. It was about being unseen, unheard, and somehow less because of what I couldn't say. I became quieter, shrinking into myself, afraid that pushing for connection might only push him further away. Deep down, a part of me began to wonder if the secret I kept was a barrier too thick to cross, if the man who once held me close had truly closed the door for good. And yet, even as doubt settled in, a small flicker of something new started to grow, a restless awareness that maybe, just maybe, I needed to see this fractured story for what it really was. That night, the fracture finally cracked wide open. I was at my mother's house, helping her sort through some old boxes in the attic, things I hadn't seen since I was a kid. The air was thick with dust and memories, the faint smell of mothballs mixing with the sharp scent of old paper. I was digging through a battered photo album when I heard voices from downstairs. My mother's voice was steady but tinged with frustration. And then, my father's. I froze, clutching the album to my chest, the sound of their words sinking into me like a cold weight. "I just don't get why Daniel can't be more like his brother," my father said, his tone sharp, almost cutting. "It's like he's ashamed of who he is. I can't keep pretending everything's fine when he's hiding so much." My mother sighed deeply, the kind of sigh that carries years of weariness. "You don't understand. It's not about shame. It's about being true to yourself." You never gave him a chance to explain. I felt my heart catch in my throat, a painful twist of confusion and betrayal. My father was still judging me, still holding on to his version of who I should be, refusing to see the person I actually was. But what stung the most was hearing it said out loud, so casually, as if my feelings, my struggles, were just inconvenient facts to be dismissed. I slipped back down the stairs, careful not to be seen, but the sting of their conversation lingered like a bruise. Suddenly, the silence between my father and me wasn't just distance. It was a wall built from misunderstanding and fear. For the first time, I understood the full weight of that secret I'd been carrying. It wasn't just something I needed to protect, it was something he couldn't accept, and that realization shattered the last remnants of my hope that time alone would bridge the gap. I sat on the cold wooden floor, the photo album open but forgotten in my lap. The faces staring back at me, smiling, innocent, unaware, felt like ghosts now, reminders of a connection I thought I had but never really did. My father's words echoed louder than any silence ever could. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine." In that moment, I stopped pretending, too. I stopped hoping for a storybook ending where love conquered all. The truth was raw and undeniable. Sometimes, love isn't enough. And sometimes, the person you need most just can't see you for who you are. That night, I felt the fragile thread between us snap, leaving me staring into a future that suddenly looked far less certain than I ever imagined. After that evening, I felt as if a heavy curtain had been drawn across the room where my heart used to live. The weight of my father's words didn't just press down on me, they reshaped the space inside, carving out a hollow where hope had once quietly resided. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, the soft hum of the city outside my window barely registering, while inside, the storm raged in near silence. My hands gripped the edge of the mattress, knuckles pale from tension, as the realization settled deeper. This wasn't just about him not understanding me. It was about me finally understanding that some bridges aren't meant to be crossed, at least not right now. The next morning, I made a choice that felt both small and monumental. Instead of going to school, instead of facing the usual routine where every interaction might carry the shadow of judgment or disappointment, I slipped out the back door and wandered to the nearby park. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of early spring, and the world around me seemed impossibly vast and indifferent. As I sat beneath a sprawling oak tree, the rough bark against my back felt grounding, a silent witness to the turmoil swirling inside me. For the first time in years, I let myself be alone without guilt, without the need to explain or defend who I was. In that quiet moment, tears came, not loud or desperate, but steady and controlled. A release I hadn't allowed myself in a long time. I felt sadness that was deep but not suffocating, a kind of ache that acknowledged loss without begging for it to be undone. There was fear, too, the fear that this new distance might become permanent, that the father I hoped to reconcile with might be forever out of reach. But woven through it all was a subtle, almost imperceptible thread of relief. Relief in choosing to protect my own heart, even if that meant stepping back from the person who should have been its greatest protector. I realized then that retreat wasn't defeat. It was a quiet rebellion against the invisible chains of expectation and shame that had bound me for so long. It was the first time I set a boundary, not with words or anger, but with the gentle firmness of self-preservation. I wasn't ready to close the door completely, but I was ready to stop standing in its threshold, waiting for a knock that might never come. That day marked the beginning of a new kind of strength, one drawn from solitude and acceptance rather than confrontation. I returned home hours later, carrying with me a secret I hadn't shared with anyone. I was no longer waiting to be seen through his eyes. I was learning to see myself, even if it was just in the quiet shadows of that park beneath the oak tree. And with that silent decision, a new distance settled between us. One I chose, one that felt less like loss and more like a fragile kind of freedom. In the weeks that followed my retreat to the park, the days blurred into a quiet routine of shadows and solitude. But one afternoon, as I sat nursing a lukewarm coffee in a small cafe near my apartment, a voice broke through the fog that had enveloped me. It was Julia, an old friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. She slid into the seat across from me with that familiar, easy smile, as if no time had passed at all. At first, I hesitated, the weight of my silence pressing down like a stone in my chest. But Julia's presence was different. Warm, patient, and somehow unafraid of the cracks I tried so hard to hide. She didn't ask me to explain or defend myself. Instead, she listened, really listened. And in that simple act, something shifted. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not through the distorted lens of my father's judgment, but as my own person, flawed and fragile but undeniably real. Julia shared stories of her own struggles, moments when she'd felt invisible or lost, and how she'd found strength not by waiting for others to understand her, but by embracing her own truth fiercely and unapologetically. Her words planted a seed of clarity deep inside me. Maybe the problem wasn't just my father's inability to accept me. It was how much power I'd given him over my sense of worth. Maybe I'd been waiting for a love that was conditional, instead of finding the courage to love myself unconditionally. It was a small revelation, but in that moment, it felt like the first light breaking through a long, unrelenting night. Julia suggested something I had never dared to consider: therapy. At first, the idea felt foreign, almost like admitting defeat. But then I realized it wasn't about surrender. It was about reclaiming my story, piece by piece, with the help of someone who could guide me through the shadows. I agreed to try, not because I believed it would fix everything, but because I was ready to stop wandering in silence. As I walked home that evening, the city lights flickered around me like distant promises. I thought about my father, the secret that had driven us apart, and the years lost to silence. But for the first time, I didn't feel crushed by the weight of it. Instead, I felt a cautious hope, a fragile but growing conviction that I could rewrite what freedom and connection meant for me. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of pain, of doubt, of old wounds reopening. But now, I wasn't just waiting for change. I was starting to move toward it. I was no longer a passive observer of my own life, held captive by fear and rejection. I was becoming the author of my own healing. And though I couldn't yet see what the future held, one thing was clear. Things were about to change. I may not know how, but I'm no longer powerless. Sometimes, when the night is still and the world quiets down, I find myself tangled in a web of thoughts I can't easily unravel. It's like my mind replays moments from the past, but now the scenes flicker with different light, shadows that weren't visible before. I think about my father, about the space between us that's been carved out for so long, and I realize I'm caught in a strange limbo. I'm no longer the child waiting for approval, but I'm not quite the person who can let go either. In this in-between, I wrestle with a mix of emotions that feel contradictory, yet intertwined. There's a part of me that still craves his acceptance, the familiar warmth of a father's embrace that was never truly there. It's a quiet ache, a hollow I sometimes mistake for hope. But alongside that desire is a growing awareness of how deeply that yearning has shaped me, how it's made me question my worth, how it's whispered lies about who I am. I feel torn, like a ship caught between two currents, the pull of what I longed for and the push of what I've had to learn for myself. At times, I catch myself replaying moments from my childhood with new eyes. I remember a family holiday, years before the rift, when my father handed me a worn-out book he once loved. Back then, I saw it as a simple gesture, a fleeting connection. But now, I think about how that book was a piece of him reaching out, however quietly, and how I didn't know then how to hold it, how I was still learning to be seen, even by my own self. It's painful to recognize how much was left unspoken, how many chances for closeness slipped through our fingers because we didn't have the language for it. I also grapple with guilt. Guilt for feeling relief when he was absent. Guilt for the moments I wished he would just disappear entirely. Those feelings confuse me, because love and resentment can coexist in the same space, tangled and messy. I wonder if he ever felt that conflict too. If he carried his own burdens of regret and misunderstanding, locked behind that cold reserve I mistook for rejection. Sometimes, I imagine him as a man trapped by his own fears, unable to reach out, just as I was unable to accept fully what was missing. In the quiet of therapy sessions, when I confront these tangled emotions, I'm often surprised by the vulnerability that surfaces. It's uncomfortable to admit how deeply I've been shaped by a silence that wasn't my choice, but became mine to carry. I question whether I've been too hard on myself, for holding on, for stepping back, for trying to protect my heart while still hoping for something more. The path to healing isn't linear. It's filled with detours into doubt and despair, moments where I wonder if I'm strong enough to keep moving forward. Yet, amid this emotional turbulence, I find a fragile kind of peace beginning to take root. I'm learning that it's okay to carry these contradictions, that love doesn't have to be simple or perfect to be real. I'm discovering that acceptance isn't about erasing pain or forgetting the past. It's about holding those memories gently, allowing them to exist without letting them define me. The story between my father and me isn't one I can rewrite alone, but the story I tell myself, the one where I am enough, even when unseen, that's the narrative I'm starting to nurture. And so, in this quiet space of reflection, I'm beginning to understand that healing isn't about closing the door on what was lost, but about opening a window to what might still grow inside me. That evening, as I was locking up my apartment, my phone buzzed with an unknown number flashing on the screen. I hesitated, but answered anyway. The voice on the other end was icy and unfamiliar. A lawyer's tone, clipped and businesslike. "Daniel Harris?" the voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "There's been a development. Your father has filed for custody review regarding your younger brother. He's alleging neglect on your mother's part and is demanding immediate access to him." A cold wave crashed over me. Custody? My father. "After all this time," I stammered. I don't understand. Why am I being told this?" The lawyer's voice was curt. "Because you are listed as a contact on some documents. You'll receive the official papers soon. Prepare yourself." The line went dead. I stood frozen on my doorstep, heart hammering like a drum in a storm. This wasn't just some distant shadow from the past anymore. This was a full-on assault, dragging me back into a war I thought I'd escaped. My father wasn't simply a figure of cold silence. He was now wielding power that could disrupt not just my life, but my mother's and my brother's too. I thought about the years of silent endurance, the painstaking therapy sessions, the fragile peace I'd been building. All of it suddenly felt like sand slipping through my fingers. The weight of his accusation wasn't just unfair. It was an assault on everything I'd come to believe was stable in my fractured family. I wanted to scream, to call him out, to demand why he was doing this after all this time. But the words caught in my throat, choked by a mix of anger, disbelief, and exhaustion. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and shut the door behind me, the lock clicking like a final barrier between me and the chaos unfolding. My hands trembled as I sank onto the couch, the room spinning with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. How could he do this? After 13 years of silence, 13 years of absence, he suddenly appeared not seeking reconciliation, but confrontation. The unfairness stung sharper than anything before. This wasn't a plea for connection. It was a calculated move to unsettle and control. And it hit me with brutal clarity. The fragile détente I'd carved out with myself was gone. This was war, and I was in the middle of it whether I wanted to be or not. I stared at the darkened window, the city lights flickering like distant warnings. Something inside me snapped, not in surrender, but in fierce resolve. Whatever came next, I couldn't retreat anymore. The battle lines were drawn, and the next move would change everything. There was no going back to that quiet limbo. The silence had shattered, and now I had to fight to protect not just my healing, but the family I still believed was worth saving. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the legal papers spread out before me like a map of a battlefield I never signed up to fight. My hands hovered over the documents, trembling, not from fear, but from a strange sense of clarity that had settled deep in my bones overnight. For years, I'd been caught in the currents of silence and longing, waiting for something to change, for my father to soften, to see me. But this sudden, sharp intrusion was different. It wasn't about healing. It was about control. I reached for my phone and dialed my mother's number. Her voice was steady, but weary when she answered. A quiet strength I hadn't fully appreciated until now. We talked longer than I expected. Not just about the papers, but about what all this meant. About how we needed to face this head-on together. No more waiting. No more hoping for an apology or understanding that might never come. Later that day, I called my father. The line was heavy with the weight of years and words unsaid. When he answered, I didn't soften or hedge. I let the silence hang between us for a moment before speaking. I know what you're trying to do, I said, my voice steady, and I need you to hear this clearly. I will not be dragged into this battle you've chosen. You want to fight for custody? Fine. But I'm done being your pawn. He was silent, the ice in his tone cracking slightly. I pressed on. This isn't about family. It's about power. And I refuse to let you use that against us. I'm setting a boundary, not out of anger, but out of respect. For myself, for my mother, for my brother. If you want a relationship with any of us, it will have to be on terms that don't tear us apart. The line went quiet again, but this time, I felt no fear. Just a heavy calm, like the air before a storm breaks. I hung up, knowing this was a point of no return. Not because I wanted to sever ties, but because I finally understood that some battles are not worth losing yourself over. That evening, I sat alone, the city's hum beneath my window a reminder that life moves forward, with or without permission. I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for someone else to choose me. I was choosing myself. And in that choice, I found a quiet power that no secret, no accusation, could ever take away. Since that conversation, life has settled into a rhythm I hadn't known for years. A quieter, steadier cadence that feels both foreign and necessary. I moved into a small apartment a few blocks away from where I used to live. A space that's all mine, painted in soft, muted tones that soothe rather than demand. Each morning, I wake to the filtered light slipping through the blinds, a gentle reminder that this day, unlike so many before, belongs solely to me. It's a modest change, but one that carries a weight of quiet significance. Here, I'm learning to breathe without the constant tension of waiting or wondering. The days themselves feel slower, not because anything monumental has shifted overnight, but because I've allowed myself the grace to move at my own pace. I've started small rituals, brewing tea with intention, journaling thoughts that once piled up like rubble inside, and taking long walks to watch the city wake up around me. These moments are subtle, almost imperceptible acts of reclaiming space within myself. They offer a softness to my life that contrasts sharply with the sharp edges of confrontation I recently endured. Emotionally, I'm navigating a strange terrain. There's a profound relief in having drawn clear lines, in finally refusing to be entangled in battles that don't serve my well-being. Yet, that relief is tinged with exhaustion. A deep, bone-weary tiredness from years of carrying burdens I was never meant to bear alone. Sometimes, a numbness settles in, a kind of quiet fog that muffles feelings until they feel distant and safe. And then, in unexpected moments, a quiet empowerment blooms. Not from victory over another, but from the knowledge that I am choosing myself. It's not a loud declaration, but a steady undercurrent, an unshakable sense that my worth isn't negotiable. My father's attempts to reach out since that call have been sporadic and, at times, disjointed. Messages left on voicemail, a few texts that veer between conciliatory and accusing. I read them with a calm detachment, no longer pulled into the swirling emotions they once ignited. When I respond, it's with measured words, setting boundaries without anger or apology. I let him know that if any connection is to exist, it must be rooted in respect and honesty, a foundation that was absent before. So far, those messages have gone unanswered, and I find peace in that silence. It's a space where I am not waiting for validation, but am instead cultivating my own acceptance. In this new space, I've begun reconnecting with people who reflect the parts of me I want to nurture. Friends who listen without judgment, who celebrate small victories and hold space for setbacks. I've started volunteering at a local community center, a way to anchor myself in something larger than my own story. These connections don't erase the past, but they fill the present with warmth and possibility. At home, I've taken to organizing my surroundings with care. A small but powerful act of control and order, In a world that often felt chaotic, sorting through books, arranging photographs of friends and moments that remind me who I am beyond the weight of old wounds. Each item placed with intention feels like a stitch in the fabric of a new identity, one woven from resilience and self-respect rather than fear or obligation. I've learned to sit with solitude not as loneliness, but as a companion. In those quiet hours, I trace the outlines of who I am becoming, someone not defined by another's rejection, but by the courage to stand firm in my truth. This process is neither swift nor simple. It's a gradual unfolding, a slow reclaiming of light after years spent in shadow. There's no illusion that everything is resolved or that the past can be erased. But in this unfolding, I am beginning to build a life shaped by choice rather than circumstance. A life where I hold the pen, not as a prisoner of what was, but as the author of what will be. This is not an ending, but a deliberate beginning. One where I step forward into a future defined by self-respect, quiet strength, and the unwavering decision never to return to a story that no longer serves me. Looking back now, with years stretched between that fractured past and this quieter present, I find myself holding a different kind of understanding. The weight I carried for so long, the silence, the rejection, the unspoken truths, they don't define me anymore. Not because the pain vanished, but because I've learned to carry it differently. I've come to see that some wounds don't heal by forcing closure or demanding answers that may never come. Instead, healing is about making peace with what is, and letting go of what I can't change. I don't look at my father through the lens of bitterness or blame anymore. That path only led me deeper into shadows I wasn't ready to leave. Instead, I see him as a man shaped by his own fears, limitations, and perhaps regrets, much like I am by mine. This perspective doesn't excuse the distance or the silence, but it softens the sharp edges of anger that once consumed me. It allows me to hold his memory alongside my own truths, without losing myself in the collision. I've accepted that some relationships, no matter how deeply we wish otherwise, may never be what we dreamed. And that acceptance is not a surrender, but a quiet affirmation of my own worth beyond those unmet expectations. I've let go of the need for his approval, not because I stopped wanting it, but because I realized my value doesn't hinge on it. I am enough in my own right. This truth has become the steady rhythm beneath the noise of my past. In the everyday moments now, I find small glimpses of peace that remind me life has a way of unfolding gently, even after years of turmoil. A morning light filtering through my window, the sound of laughter with friends who see me clearly, the simple act of writing my thoughts without fear or judgment. These fragments, though small, are profound. They are the quiet victories that stitch together a life reclaimed. If there's one thing I want to share with anyone listening, whether you're carrying a secret, feeling unseen, or grappling with the silence of someone you love, it's this: your story matters, exactly as it is. You don't have to wait for others to recognize your worth. You have the power to honor yourself, to set boundaries that protect your peace, and to build connections that nourish your soul. Healing isn't linear or neat. It's messy. It's slow. And sometimes it feels like a whisper in the dark. But it's always possible. Thank you for sharing this space with me, for listening to a story that is as much about struggle as it is about resilience. If what I've shared resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe and join this community of honest reflection and support. A like or a share might seem small, but it could be the quiet bridge someone else needs right now, a reminder that they're not alone in their journey. As I close this chapter, I hold on to a gentle hope, not for perfect endings, but for moments of grace that carry us forward, step by step, toward a life where we can finally be seen and accepted, first by ourselves, and then, perhaps, by others.